Okay. So we're 1 minute over, so I guess I should begin. So firstly, welcome everybody. I'll use my new handy-dandy clicker. So this is Roberto, and my name's Glenn, and we work at American Express, and we'd like to talk to you about JavaScript behind the firewall. Just 1 second, everyone. Thank you. So, to begin with, we'd like just to introduce ourselves. As I said, Roberto and Glenn, these are our GitHub handles and our Twitter handles. I think that's kind of run for the norm. They do allow us in the financial services to have these too, or they don't like us to say very much about them or on them. And kind of the subject of the talk is a little bit about that and how we're kind of emerging from behind the firewall, peeping out a little bit and saying, hello, did you know that we use Node a lot? So I'm going to start off. How many of you have got corporate American Express cards? Okay, so that precludes my first question. So, how many of you work at big enterprises? Oh, how many of you work at small and medium-sized enterprises? Yeah. How many of you actually don't work yet? Okay, there could be some students in the room. So, both of us work for a company, a well-established company, established in 1850, delivering letters, believe it or not. And a lot of people forget that. It was a Stagecoach company. And if you ever go to our corporate headquarters, you'll see lots of pictures of the Stagecoach and the mail bags. But it kind of branched off into financial services. So before I get on and actually talk about anything to do with technology, I'd like to ask, what is a big enterprise or a big financial services company? So I looked a few things up on Wikipedia, and I looked up, so this is straight off the web, so it's okay to talk about it. Visa and MasterCard, about 15,000 people each. How many of you would like to have a guess about how many people work at Facebook? And shout out, please, interact with me. Very good, it is about 30,000 according to Wikipedia and those sources. How many do you think work at Google? There must be some people from Google here. How many? 80. Not quite as many as that. 60 according to the web, but I don't know if we believe the web. So, Microsoft, big behemoth. Come on, anyone from Microsoft, you should know. Over 100,000, like really, really big numbers, yeah? So I think we can kind of generalize, like, if thousands of people are a rounding error at big enterprise, you are at a really big enterprise. And probably American Express fits in that as well. It's a rounding error about between 50 and 60,000 if you believe what's on the internet, and I'm going to quote that number because it's publicly available. So my talk is really about coming out from behind the cloud, and so you can see us, and telling you about the differences, because there are quite some big differences when you work at a financial services company in the way we use Node and JavaScript. So if any of you ever applied for a card recently in the last 2 years, that was our website. It's a Node-based, React-based website. Funny enough, the legacy part of it, legacy is Angular 1. It became legacy very quickly. So 2 years is quite a long time in the realms of JavaScript. So to start off with, I'd just quickly like to talk about what's really valuable for big enterprise. This is general. Reputation, okay? We don't want to screw up our reputation. So us actually coming to talk to you is actually quite a new thing, because mostly they didn't want us to do that. This is quite a new thing, and they've encouraged us to go out and to speak about a few things. So what do we actually use Node for? What do we do with this JavaScript stuff? So I don't want to surprise you in the first few slides, so I'm going to take it slowly, okay? So we do what you do. Exactly the same, but we do it more carefully, obviously. So we transpile, we pack things up, we run tests, we run integration tests. We do all the same things. There's very little difference in our pipeline than from your pipeline. You should recognize everything we do, yeah? So our front-end and back-end stack, if we put it up in symbols, is straight away you're saying, well, that's pretty much what we do. What's so hard about that? Yeah. So some things are changing. We're moving into using Graph. That is a new thing. It is taking off. But there are some things that are quite difficult when you're behind that firewall. And there may be things that seem quite ordinary and everyday to you. So if you wanted to actually upgrade your version of Node, That is not an easy endeavor. We all know if we're doing it locally, we just do an MVM install, a different one, and it just works dandy. It's great. It's really easy. But we can't see outside of the firewall to do that. And we can't see any of our modules outside the firewall. We can't see Node SAS. We have to put everything behind the firewall in private registries. And it's not until you actually do that do you really learn what NPM is doing. If you were to turn the internet off, that's pretty much akin to what we have, yeah? If you were to go in and go into your network tab and just go off, that's pretty much what we deal with. So we have our own private registries, no surprise there. But what's really difficult is a lot of the modules you have compiled components, yeah? They go out when you're not looking, they go out onto the web, they go out to GitHub, they pull stuff down, they compile it. You don't take any notice of it. Once you get behind a firewall, that all stops. Nothing works. Well, only JavaScript works, pure JavaScript. Most of your important modules, your problem children, Node SAS, I keep referencing that, it is quite a big problem. Anything that compiles is a problem until perhaps we get the application binary interface in there. So our biggest problem is actually doing upgrades. We have to go and find out every single dependency. Like, I have extensive knowledge of everything that everything depends on that's a problem child. I don't want to know, but someone has to go and do it. And that usually ends up being the senior developers that are pushing for the latest releases of Node. So we have to go and get those C++ and C headers. We have to get the compilation headers for Node. All those ones that get installed in your .nodejip folder. Have you ever noticed that? Yeah, all that gets pulled down. You don't even think about it. For us, no, that doesn't happen. They come to me and say, it's broken. It doesn't work. Fix it, Glenn. Make it better. And I go and say, well, you've got to go and get these files. But you can't get those files behind the firewall. You have to go and get them. You have to present them to somebody important and say why you're using the stuff from the internet. And then they have to put it in a place, and then you have to tell your installation tools to go and get them from that place. So some things you take for granted are very different. And they're very different for a good reason. We don't take risks. We don't download code unless it's actually been checked out, yeah? So generally, we're a couple of point releases behind the rest of the world, but you know what? That really doesn't matter because we don't have problems with ESLint, okay? So what else is different? So one of the big things you actually have at a revenue-generating company is legacy code, or as we like to call it, revenue-generating code. So, come the next downturn, I promise you, many developers will be glad they have this revenue-generating code, yeah? Something that actually turns a buck. Now, there's nothing wrong with the word profit, yeah? Often we talk about technology. We do technology, but it's technology for a purpose. Our job in life is to get you to press that apply now button, yeah? And I'd encourage you to go and get the new rose gold card. So, how many of you actually have legacy projects you maintain that make money? That's quite a lot of you, yeah? And how many of those are actually getting new features? Some of them, yeah? Often there's a lot of things out there that you have to maintain because they make the company money. They pay for you and I. We have mortgages, we have homes, we have kids to put through college, yeah? But they're actually a little bit difficult to keep going. Firstly, how many of you can recognize old JavaScript just by looking at it? Yeah, you know when you look at it, and then what do you say? Yeah, you say something along those lines when you go and see that old JavaScript. Well, there are some things, if you actually have profitable code in one of our companies, you can make a real case for doing something about it to keep it going, yeah? There are a lot of tools out there now. We know we can write unit tests, we know we can lint, we know we can do things, but it's actually making the case for keeping old code and turning it into new code to actually make it enjoyable to work on and profitable and maintainable, yeah? So that is quite a big difference. You get to inherit stuff. So how many had a startup? One back there. Did you inherit anything? Oh, you did. That's a little unusual. Mostly, but at the enterprise, you do get to inherit stuff because people move on and you have to keep it working because that's what's keeping the wheels oiled. So once you have this revenue-generating code out there, spinning, doing stuff, making money, you have to keep an eye on it. Okay, so extensively, there's probably a lot more monitoring in the financial services going on than you're probably used to. Like, we have whole teams of products support people that monitor stuff, that make diligent phone calls to us at the weekend to tell us that particular things might not be right. But we monitor the same things that you monitor. We look at RAM usage, we look at overall journeys on the web, we actually look at, what's going on, what's not going on. There's nothing completely out of the ordinary. So one of my messages to you is, like the big financial services companies, the difference is actually not based in technology. They're based in like diligence and care and things that we pay more attention to that are perhaps afterthoughts for a lot of other companies, because it's more important to get your product out. For us, it's more important to do it right. So there have been some changes for some of us financial companies. So we're actually starting to come out and say, hello community, we won't just use your stuff willy-nilly, we'll actually acknowledge that we do use Node, and we do use JavaScript, and a lot of people, actually the V8 team was surprised. Oh, you run Node? Yeah, we run lots of Node. How much Node? Well, we couldn't tell you that, but a lot of Node. And we're very much into it. So it's come to a point now where we're actually talking about giving back. Now, how can we actually give back? Well, perhaps we can be a little bit less secretive. So we're actually publishing modules. Some of them have become popular. Some of them haven't. That's the way with the Node ecosystem. It's very much a popularity contest. So we're doing our very best. And this is actually a big change, because I think even a couple of years ago, you wouldn't have had somebody from one of the main financials in Lower Manhattan come out and say, hey, we use your stuff. We would have said nothing and kept on going. So that's the first takeaway, and with that, I'm going to hand you over to Roberto, my partner here, and we're going to continue.
Hello, can you guys hear me? Great. So I'm talking about test automation. Typically in the enterprise, we can't just settle for the testing tools that are in the industry. You use Jest for unit tests, you use Selenium for regression or end-to-end tests. For example, we use Jest for unit tests, but then on top of that, we also, post-production, when we release something, we use Jest to go out and fetch the content of a particular page and identify if any particular content has changed that is important to us. This means that somebody changed something that we didn't expect them to change. So that will trigger an alert, and then therefore somebody can act on it. We also do visual regression testing. So you take a screenshot of a particular page, but there's a problem in Selenium. Some browsers don't actually take a full screen image or shot of the page. So then we have to go and take each snapshot, save that somewhere, and then when we push to production, do the same thing and do a comparison, again, to see if anything has changed. Things like this help our QA team to better catch bugs, because if they see that something changed that wasn't in the initial requirement for the release, then they can notify us immediately. Other things that Node allowed us to do is to do server-side rendering. So before you had a CSR or a client-side rendering application, and it was pretty easy to manage that application. You had a single state, a single session. But now with SSR, you're actually rendering the website on the server, meaning that you're connecting the server to other APIs. So your server and the APIs have a state or a session. And then you have to persist that session to your CSR, so to your client-side application. So no longer is the state just managed by the browser. It's actually also managed in the server and in the browser. And you have to think about the first initial request, the user making that first initial request. And you also have to think about a subsequent request. A lot of times when we think about rendering, we only focus on the first request, but we have to think about the whole journey in the enterprise, and we have to think about how that session is managed. So redesigning is a huge thing for the enterprise. You have two types of redesign. You have a new page on a new URL, and then you have a new page on an existing URL. Typically, you'll see the second one more, where we're redesigning or taking a legacy site and upgrading it to either a new framework or a new design. The one thing that's very important to us is that if a URL exists, that means that we have customers that are being driven to this particular page. So what we don't want to happen is interrupt their experience, right? And we don't want to ever release something which is not fully vetted or tested. Sorry. Okay. So one of the things that we try to do is, in the enterprise, everything that you do in a normal company or a smaller company, we do in the enterprise, like Glenn mentioned. The only difference is that everything is amplified. So we have multiple product teams across multiple countries working on the same thing. Sometimes they're duplicating code or implementations. What that leads to is that when you go to the new framework in 2 years or 3 years, you have all this dead code or legacy code that needs to be revamped. Nobody really understands how it truly works because some people might have moved on to other teams. So one of the things that we try to do is make each aspect of our pipeline reusable. So swapping out components, instead of creating components for a single market or a single country, we try to create components that can be used by any team, any dev teams. We can swap out the content, we can swap out the style and the template, the page template, all at runtime dynamically. We are very heavily invested in test and learn. We understand that each customer is different. We can't give just one experience to all customers. We have to tailor those experiences based on where the customer is coming from or their overall journey. So performance is a huge thing for us. We basically track as much as possible. We literally track all the information that we can track, and then we save that somewhere regarding performance. And if you ever need it in the future, you can always pull those key metrics to understand, okay, how long is a page taking to render? How long is your first to interactive? What is your meaningful paint, right? If you don't track all the possible metrics of the browser, when you find an issue, it's going to be much harder for you to deal with it if you figured out that you actually are missing any sort of data. One thing that's very important is setting a performance budget. If you guys don't have that, you should probably set that in place. So what a performance budget does is that when you are building your code, before you deploy, it checks your current size of your bundle, your overall like CSS, all the images, compared to your previous. If it's increased past a certain amount, it actually fails your build. Right, so what that does, a lot of times what we tend to do is not look at the resources that are loaded or introduced post-production. Right? So you should try to create a budget that tracks all that information. The other thing that's really important in the enterprise is that you have to have reporting. So again, if you don't have the data, you can't report on the data. So make sure that you have the data. You have to talk to your product and marketing team. A lot of times you'll find that companies, each segment of the teams, each teams are segmented. Right? So product doesn't talk to engineering that well. Engineering doesn't talk to design, QA doesn't talk to engineering, right? Everybody's segmented. So you have to have a good relationship across the board. You also have to invest in your dev teams, right? If somebody doesn't know something, we typically spend time to teach them, bring them up to speed, show them how to go into the particular tool or dev tool and identify particular performance. So typically that's done through some sort of post-mortem. So you go through and actually explain what has happened. You also need an agreement across the organization, right? If you want to improve your site, if you want to improve your page, but your stakeholders don't have the same intentions or they don't want to do it, it's not going to help you out. So you have to take that data, bring it to the people that can make change, and show them like, hey, if we make these particular changes, we might see an improvement and a better user engagement.
Whoops. So, briefly, and I know it's the second to last talk, and I know we've had lots of code put in front of you, so I'm not going to do that. You won't have to look at any more JavaScript from us. So, but I'm going to talk to you briefly about configuration. So, 3 types of configuration really exist out there. The stuff you compile with when you build, pre-production, the stuff that you run with, post-production, and the stuff that you don't want anyone to know about, which you don't put in your repos. We're very careful. No developers have passwords. Nobody can get hold of your information. We're very, very careful about our configurations. But generally, you would find that the big enterprise has the same development, staging, production environments you do, and you'd recognize every single part of that. But perhaps there's one thing that big enterprise has that can be a little bit tiresome. It's the corporate solution, meaning you may have your ideas about how to do things, but so do they. And if we all go away doing our own thing, it's going to cost them a lot of money. So an example of that would be simply, we are a React shop. American Express is a React shop. We had other lovers previously, and now we're in love with React. We have various different ways of building things. But we've decided as a corporation it's very, very inefficient to have different teams building things with different frameworks, both front end and back end. And so we're standardized. And that is one of the differences about JS behind the firewall. You perhaps have less choice, but if you look at our stack, isn't that the stack you use anyway? It's just, you have to use it. Okay. So one of the last things we'd like to wrap up on is really the difference between how we feel about the startup and big enterprise. So you can do a lot of things at startup. You can take a lot of risks. You know, you can burn out your employees. You can be disruptive, yeah? But on the flip side, you can do a lot of things at big enterprise. You just can't do a startup. We can train people. We can bring them in. We can treat them well. We can take a much longer term view. We can structure careers. We can take account of you having families, yeah? And we can also be disrupted by startups. But hey, that's not going to happen to us. We've been around too long. So with that, I'd like to conclude. And this is Roberto and I handles, and we'd like to take questions.